Now that congressional supercommittee has called it quits, President Obama says he will veto any congressional effort to avoid the $1.2 trillion in automatic spending cuts. Senator Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania is the author of a $1.5 trillion deficit plan that the Republicans presented to the committee, and he joins us this morning from Philadelphia. Senator, good to see you again.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Where do we go from here? Some reports yesterday that Max Baucus was talking about some new idea that they were going to move forward somehow. If there was no 11th hour deal, is there any possibility of a 13th hour deal?
I think it's going to be tough, in part because the committee was set up to have extraordinary powers to bring legislation to the House and Senate floor that wouldn't be subject to amendment, wouldn't be subject to a filibuster, and those opportunities are now gone, sadly. So I think it'll be difficult, but we can't give up this effort. We're on a completely unsustainable fiscal path, and I certainly hope we can begin to make some real progress before we get the very predictable financial crisis that will result if we don't change this path.
Over the kinds of things the committee was looking at, or over things like payroll tax cuts or unemployment benefits? I mean, are those at risk as we get to the year end?
Oh, I think it's an open question as to how we'll handle those things. Of course, those things would exacerbate the problem we have. Those are new spending or diversion of funds out of Social Security. So we'd have to figure out a way to deal with that. My highest priority is to have solidly pro-growth policy and change this fiscal path we're on, bend the cost curves of the big programs that are completely unsustainable. That's the tragedy of the missed opportunity on the committee.
Is it true that the committee hadn't met in weeks? I know Politico had some background on how things fell apart. The last public meeting, I think, at the beginning of November, the last private meeting, October 20-something. Was there really that little communication going on?
No, there was a lot of communication that was going on. Relatively early on, it became clear that formal meetings for the group of 12 altogether were not constructive. But there were subsets, Democratic and Republican members meeting almost daily, sometimes multiple times each day. That was very much an ongoing back and forth that frankly continued right up through the weekend.
Would you support any rollback of the sequester, or are you one of those that wants to see us take our medicine now that we've failed at this venture?
I think it's absolutely essential that we go ahead and have these cuts, but I would reconfigure them, and that's what one of the things I'm going to dedicate some serious effort to is to take a number of the measures that we discovered through this process, areas where we absolutely should be cutting spending, and suggest that we do those things instead of weighting these cuts so heavily towards defense, which our own defense secretary said would hollow out our defense. So I think we've got to modify it, but we cannot just cancel them.
Senator, I understand your longer-term goals, but immediately, is the focus going to be on the extension of the payroll tax holiday and the unemployment insurance? Because some estimates are that it would mean 2% off of GDP in 2012. Markets want to know that these things will be in place beyond the end of the year. Are you prepared to roll up your sleeves, work over holidays, make sure that somehow you reach an agreement on this?
Well, first of all, I'm certainly willing to work on this, and there are many available offsets that we could use so that we don't increase our deficit by these amounts. But I will tell you, would be very dismissive of the notion that we would lose 2% of GDP if we don't extend those provisions. So I think they are going to be addressed probably relatively soon, I hope in a sensible and responsible way. But I'm a little skeptical about projections of that magnitude.
Senator Toomey, I think there's an overwhelming sense developing in America that we're kind of where we were in 1860. The partisanship just out of control, that the two sides just really despise each other. And so therefore nothing can get done. And you are creating ennui and gloom on your own that literally does counteract some of the great work that our businesses are doing in this country. Do you speak to businesses? Do you recognize the toll that you're placing on American business and American economics?
Yeah, Jim, I talk to folks every day in business in Pennsylvania and around the country, and I think what Washington is doing is absolutely creating a chilling effect. That's why I went way outside of my comfort zone and that of many of my Republican colleagues by proposing that we actually put revenue on the table in the context of pro-growth tax reform. And frankly, it's out of my comfort zone because I don't believe we have a revenue problem. I think we've got a spending problem. I think we've got a problem with the structural design of entitlement programs that are completely unsustainable. I think we've got a problem when the government spends 25% of GDP as compared to its historical level of closer to 20%. But I was still willing to put some revenue on the table in an effort to try to make some progress on this. I wish we had been met somewhere along the way.
You mentioned getting out of your comfort zone. Good piece in the Journal today by Jerry Seib about how the reason this committee failed is because voters reward those who stick to their own sides, right? There is no reward, there is no penalty, I should say, for bipartisanship. Do you think by putting forward the proposal you did, you're going to pay a price at the polls next time?
Well, you know, I'm comfortable living with that, whatever the consequences are. I think it was the right thing to do to propose some pro-growth tax reform that would simplify the code, lower rates, broaden the base, avoid this giant tax increase that's coming in 14 months. There's no doubt in my mind that that would have been extremely constructive for markets, for investment, for job growth. So if there's a price to be paid, so be it. I think it was the right thing to do.
Senator, good to see you as always. See you next time.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Pat Toomey.
And there's much more Squawk on the Street straight ahead.
Coming up, 6 talks in 60 seconds. 6 goes to 60.